Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. You know, I'm loving this weather because we're taping this on Thursday, February 8th, and as we were walking into the Forum building here, there's a beautiful, gentle rain. It's in the 40s, and if I close my eyes and imagine, it's an April day.
It does feel like
April rain, and I'd be looking for the buds to be swelling and the flowers to be sprouting up, and yeah. And February.
In February, you know, who would have thought about that? Yeah, here we are. We're not even a third of the way through the month, and we're dealing with this. This is really a strange year.
You know, it's interesting. And all this winter, you know, we say, on a certain day we've had approaching a record high, or we maybe made a record high, or the temperature on this date we hadn't seen since, 40 years ago or something. But, like if the temperature on a certain day, if we had seen this 30, 40 years ago, well, that means it happened before, right? Yeah. Okay. But when we have a whole winter like this, that's been like this mild, very little or no snow, I mean, it's been the whole winter. I mean, this has got to be totally out of the blue, never happened in recorded history.
Not for this duration, no.
No, yeah, not for this duration. Certainly, a January thaw, a little bit of a warm spell that we all enjoy. But I mean, this is totally unreal. And I've talked to others, farmers, garden people, and asked them, do you guys remember any of this? And is it no?
No. It is really, really something very, very different. And we're going to talk about this because whether this is just this year or whether this is maybe we'll see similar years like this or somewhat similar to this coming down the road, this will affect our lawn and garden. So let's just kind of...
It does. I'm looking forward to today's show to talk about some of these effects that it could have.
Yeah. And so let's just talk about it. Just really basically, what are you seeing? I mean, you went out and you walked around your garden, and you have a big garden. We've been out there. We had the camera crew out there. But there's the great thing about your garden is that there's things that'll be coming up at different times of the year. So what are you seeing out there? And different times of the year, by the way, we're not thinking February. So what are you seeing out there now? What's happening in your yard right now in early February?
And, of course, one thing that I love about our own yard is that what's happening in our yard is usually very much the same thing that's happening in other people's yard. Yeah. And, of course, we live in Fargo, but things like this usually occur kind of more widespread, in the upper Midwest here. So it's not like I'm living in a little pocket of a banana belt or anything. Right. So what I see, most people are probably seeing something similar. So now the walk that I took around our yard and garden, and I had a good time. Temperatures in the 40s, light jacket on. And what it reminded me is of the walks that I take probably late March, early April, when the snow has gone. Because as I walked around, there's no snow in our yard, none at all. The grass is totally free of any snow. And it was the walk that I would usually be taking late March, early April, maybe mid-April some years when the snow is all gone. And so I had to pinch myself that it was actually February. Yeah. So anyway, it'll be kind of interesting to go through kind of the sections of the yard that I went through. What am I seeing on the perennials? What am I seeing on the shrubs, the trees, etc. So it's going to be kind of fun to go through each of these. But again, this is the walk that I usually take much later in the season and not on February 8th.
Yeah, and so we're not saying that we're 6 weeks ahead of growing season. We don't know what will be happening.
Exactly.
John Wheeler, who's been on the show a number of times, he stresses really forecasting before more than 10 days out is really it's really not an accurate thing. You really can't do it with any kind of sense of surety.
Right, and I believe he said too that the El Nino that we're in typically typically ends at a certain point, and then we'll start getting a little more winter. So now as we're recording this Thursday, February 8th, it's warm, it's raining, but also when I look at the forecast, the extended maybe 5-10 day forecast, after this, it looks like we're going to have a cool down, maybe a little snow, maybe an inch of snow, some freezing stuff. And so when people are actually listening to this podcast in a few days, we might have experienced that cool down already.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious. Does that mean that the El Nino effect is kind of ending a little bit? But then I'm seeing an extended forecast when it's back up again. So I can take temperatures in the 20s above zero.
The 20s, the highs in the 20s in February is still pretty delightful.
It is. And it's going to be really interesting what plays out. And of course, nobody has a crystal ball that's going to be certain. So I am really, really curious what's going to happen from here on out. And the effect that this has on our trees, shrubs, perennials, I think a great deal has to do with what is yet to come.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like right now we're treading warm water.
It is warm water.
We're treading water. And to me, a lot of whether things are going to come through okay or be injured depends on what we're going to see for the rest of the season.
Well, so let's start where all plants and trees just in the ground. What effect is this having on the soil? What are you seeing in the soil now?
Okay, so when I went out in our yard yesterday, I've got an area of perennials where I had planted some new perennials, some iris in the fall. So that soil was still unmulched. I hadn't put the wood mulch on yet. So I took a stick and a shovel to see how far down. Okay, well, it's really, really muddy on about maybe the top 3 inches, but I could not get a shovel down and dig a hole. So there's still frost down at a certain depth. And this was in a spot where I was checking. It wasn't by the south side of the house where it had artificially warmed up. This was out a ways into the yard. So then I checked the NDAWN, NDAWN soil temperature chart.
Okay.
And so it's easily searching that. I think it stands for the North Dakota Agriculture Weather Network. Okay. So that gives reporting points all around the state of North Dakota, and there's some points western Minnesota as well. And that has a chart showing what the soil temperature is all around the state at these different reporting points. And of course, I checked Fargo, and then it has the soil temperatures at the 2-inch level, the 4-inch level, the 8-inch. And I was astounded when I looked at the whole chart all across North Dakota. It was covered with 32 degrees, maybe a 31 degree here and there. Now, typically in February, we would have frozen soil.
Yeah.
Some years, if the frost penetrates way down, I don't know, it can go 5 feet down maybe. That's why a lot of water lines are down at the 6 to 8 foot level to be down below frost level. And okay, so when I took a look, 32 degrees all over the North Dakota map, including Fargo, and it was 32 degrees down to about 16 inches. So below 16 inches in Fargo, which is not very deep, the soil is unfrozen. Okay, and in the top 16 inches, it's only frozen to about 32 degrees. So it's barely frozen. So it's not going to take a great deal of heat to raise that from 32 degrees, which is the freezing point of water, 32 degrees up out of that. So it's not going to take too much to get the frost out of the ground this year, versus if that soil was frozen maybe at 20 degrees, that's going to take a lot more heat to raise it up to the thawing point. So I was really amazed. Okay, so the top couple of inches was thawed, muddy, and frost in the ground. But boy, it's not frozen very deep, and it's not frozen very hard.
Hey, when you were talking about how it really wouldn't take much to raise that temperature to raise what the areas that are frozen, and there's no snow cover too. So if we were to have a sunny day, all that radiant sun really would just absolutely speed that up. It's probably actually been a good thing in a way that we've had mostly cloudy days.
Yeah, exactly. And because, of course, there's a danger of the frost coming out of the ground too soon. When we talk about trees and shrubs here, we'll get to that. But also, it's interesting. One of the big spring issues, one of the big spring things that happens each year for both farming and gardening is we wait for the frost to come out of the ground.
Yeah.
Because then, of course, you can start doing stuff, planting, digging, et cetera. You got to watch for the frost, but that's a big deal when the frost comes out of the ground. And so, wow, when the soil here is barely frozen, it's not going to take much to get that frost out of the ground. Now, you mentioned, John, the lack of snow. Okay, yeah, that's going to allow the warmth to penetrate. The thing I've been concerned about is that lack of snow. Also, if we got a really, really cold spell, that lack of snow, the lack of insulating snow, could cause that cold to penetrate very deeply. The other thing that's possibly damaging when the soil is barely frozen, and like I say in Fargo, the top couple inches was actually unthawed and muddy, we get the freezing and thawing. Thawing during the day, maybe freezing if the temperature dips down at night. And that freezing and thawing can tear roots, especially of perennials, which aren't really rooted that deeply. A lot of them, the roots maybe only go down 6 to 8, maybe 12 inches. And that freezing and thawing of the topsoil causes expansion, contraction, and pretty soon those roots are literally torn. And they can actually heave out of the ground. Iris are a good example. That freezing and thawing, they aren't rooted that deeply, and that freezing and thawing can literally heave them out, so they're kind of laying with roots exposed out of the ground. We used to kind of tongue-in-cheek, a horticulture joke, you get humor where you can. And we used to say, oh, did your perennials heave? That's one of those gardening terms that, may not mean something to everybody. But, so anyway, I'm a little concerned that our perennials might heave this year. And so anyway, an interesting soil situation versus many years.
One of the things that you had been talking about in the fall, and especially when we'd had John Wheeler on and kind of talking about what an El Nino effect could mean, and he did say that this could be a warmer than the normal winter. One of the things that you had suggested is for people to go around, and if you're concerned about some perennials that may be a little bit tender, or if you're just concerned in general, give them, if we're not going to have much snow, give them an extra layer of mulch or something that, not grass, but mulch or leaves, something like that could add that kind of barrier or that kind of warm insulating blanket. Now with the temperatures the way they are now, like you're saying, going around and looking and seeing some things, should people go out and add some mulch if they have, or if they've got bags of leaves around the base of the house or something like that, put those out in areas, or is it too late for that?
No, definitely. I would definitely go ahead and do that. The purpose of mulch applied in the fall is to keep things comfortably frozen, is the term I like to use. The mulch really shouldn't be applied, and when I say mulch, protective mulch that you would mound over a plant. Slightly different than the soil mulch, the wood mulch that we would put just on the soil. But protective mulch gets mounded up over kind of the crown of the plant more, so higher on up. And so to keep things comfortably frozen is the term I like to use, not thawed out, but just comfortably frozen. And to prevent this freezing, thawing, the changes, it just kind of buffers the change. So what if we didn't put that protective mulch over things? And there are some things I didn't that I kind of wished I woulda, but so what could I do now? Well, you might be able to have access to straw. I see on some of these social media marketplaces, there are places pretty close to metros where you could get straw, for $4 or $5 a bale. A bale goes quite a ways, so not terribly expensive. Maybe Garden Center still has some straw on hand from their fall sales. Bags of wood chips. Mm-hmm. Bags of wood chips, you could mound that over some kind of precious perennials that you might have planted. And that wood chip, then in the spring, that wood chip mulch could kind of be raked away from the crown of the plant a little bit and just used as a soil cover too. But in the meantime, now you would mound it up. Or maybe you can find some leaves. I've got some leaves along the garden fence where they kind of blew and caught.
Yep.
So I would be able to rake some leaves from that and go put over those mum plants that I want to make sure that they come through. So when I say comfortably frozen, so we're supposed to get chilly again.
Yep.
So if the ground surface kind of freezes a bit, I think that's when I would put the mulch on. And I think that's what I'm going to try to do. Okay. There is a problem with some of these things, such as perennials. There's problems that this wet, soggy soil, especially if you've got heavy clay, there's chance that there could be rotting on the plants. We talk about crown rot. The crown of a plant, like on perennial, is a spot where the stems meet the roots. It's kind of that growing point. Excuse me. And we can oftentimes have a rot that sets in, especially in cool, clammy, heavy soil.
Okay. All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what this weather means for our yard and garden.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, we're back and we're talking about what this weird winter weather, what this means for our yard and garden and what it'll mean for this year and maybe beyond. But let's talk about perennial flowers. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what are your thoughts on what this will mean for perennial flowers?
Well, when I took a walk around our yard, looked at the perennial flowers, examined the daylilies, because sometimes they'll be quick to poke up. I looked carefully down kind of into the crowns where the growing points are. I did not see any daylilies coming up. Looked at the other perennials out around the various types. I saw no activity yet. And but there's one perennial that I did see activity, but it's kind of normal, and that's iris.
Oh.
The iris. Now, if you notice in the fall when you're cutting back the old leaves of iris, right down by the enlarged, they aren't really bulbs, they're a corm. And if you look right down by that in the fall, there's usually next spring's leaf is already starting to form. It's kind of a little triangle sitting there, and it's green in the fall. And I notice that all the time. Yeah, but pretty soon in the fall, then you get the snow cover, and so that's sitting under the snow unseen. And then in the spring, when the snow melts, you kind of see, the iris look like they're coming. Well, since we didn't have snow much, the iris are exposed, and so I'm seeing that little triangle, the same little triangle that I always see, a little green triangle sitting there by the bulb, the corm. And so that's ready. I do not see it expanding. If I saw that starting to grow, that wouldn't be good because it's only early February and chances of getting nipped by cold would be great. So I'm seeing normal on everything. I do, as we mentioned, the soggy soil. I don't like as soggy as that soil is because the topsoil is thawed, and I don't like that heavy clay gooey look that I see to it now. So I'm concerned about the freezing, thawing, and the effect on that. Now, when I checked our tulips, no sign of the tulips coming up yet. Because I've been down this road before where I planted tulips on the south side of our house, and then they're coming up early because it warms up, and then of course do they get nipped, or the rabbits don't have anything else to eat early, and so the early tulips, the rabbits eat them all off, and so I've learned to plant the tulips away from the house, out in the flower bed. I see no signs of those coming up.
Okay.
However, I have gotten some emails from people whose tulips planted close to the house foundation on the south side are coming up. Now, the nice thing about tulips, they are so cold hardy, even after the leaves have started coming up. They'll take probably easily down to 10 degrees, maybe 0 degrees without really being burnt. It's a different issue if the flower bud were up and blooming. That's more sensitive. But for people that are having some tulips show up, that kind of happens every year. It's more likely to happen this year, but they're usually okay. There's not a whole lot you can do because once the greenery starts forming, if you were to cover it with mulch, they're gonna kind of what's the term I'm looking for? They're gonna kind of languish under that cover because they need light. They'd get all spindly and try to be stretching, and then they'd become weak. So if you do have tulips that have already started, if we're going to get a really, really cold night, such as below 0, you might want to temporarily cover them, but then uncover them so that they can get light. One thing you can do around tulips, though, is add some mulch, straw, leaves, wood chips, shredded bark, kind of in amongst the tulips onto the soil, just to kind of buffer things a little bit, but leave the leaves out of that mulch so they can still get light.
So don't bury them.
Yeah, it's so important not to bury the leaves under mulch. Otherwise, they're really going to languish under that for lack of light.
Sometimes people will put cones out in their yard over the winter and things like that to add insulation.
Cones especially.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about, some people would say should they be putting boxes over certain plants in their yard that maybe, or tulips or things like that maybe, just as a way to kind of insulate them a little bit, putting boxes out there or something like that? Or is that bad because they're not getting any light that way?
Yeah, a box with a brick on it, or a rose cone with a brick on so it doesn't blow away. It probably doesn't do any harm as long as the plants are not growing.
Okay.
Yeah, because if they are growing, then they need light.
So if the tulips,
but if you are kind of looking to mitigate things a little bit and you don't have any mulch or anything, a cardboard box placed over something that isn't growing, is probably not a bad idea as well. It would be a little something to try. And because even just, keeping it, keeping a little maybe more mild under there, might be a good idea.
Is there anything that we can do? Like you said, that you have concern about the dampness of the soil and there being rot. Is there anything we can do, or is it just kind of wait and see?
Yeah, I don't know of anything we can do about that. It's a good case for, and I work on this continually, is trying to modify our soil, especially if you've got heavy clay, to try to get it a little better drained so it doesn't be so soggy. And of course, the antidote for that is always organic matter.
Okay.
And so I kind of envy people that have a sandy loam, where it isn't such heavy clay. But we work with what we've got.
Right. We can't do too much. How is this affecting? Let's talk about shrubs and bushes, but then eventually into trees too. What are you seeing there as far as those?
When I took a walk around the landscape, first of all, the shrubs. Now we have an aronia shrub, the aronia berry. Mm-hmm. We have a shrub of that on the southeast corner, far enough from the house so it doesn't usually get artificially warm, but I noticed the buds looked really, really plump. And they haven't broken out of their little protective coating yet, but they looked really, really plump. And now usually in February, I'm not trouncing through the snow looking at the aronia buds because, you just know everything's really, really dormant yet. And so it doesn't look, what am I trying to say? It doesn't look, they haven't opened up yet, so I'm not overly concerned, but they really seem like they're plumping up and getting ready. But if they don't expand, I think they're going to be okay. So then as I walked around to the other shrubbery, they looked kind of similar, like, boy, they're getting ready, but nothing had expanded. See, if they do expand, if they start to open up, they're going to get frozen. Those buds are going to get frozen off. They'll usually send out some what's called latent buds that are kind of hiding, but that's very hard on a tree or shrub. And so as I walk along further, are shrub roses. Now, the hardy Canadian shrub roses look pretty good. I did not I don't usually mound mulch over there because the snow gives the mulch. Snow is called the poor man's mulch because it just gives such good insulation. So usually our roses have plenty of snow around them. They don't this year. On some of the slightly less hardy shrub roses, I'm noticing some dieback.
Okay.
I'm noticing the fact that they didn't have the protective snow. Luckily, it hasn't been frigid for very long, but we did have a little bit of a cold snap, and I see some top injury from cold on some of those roses. Luckily, the lower part is fine, and in April, we need to prune them anyway, so I'll cut off that damage. But I can see the effect of the lack of snow on protecting roses. I notice that. On the upside, my roses aren't all gnawed down by rabbits. Usually the rabbits, and sometimes they prune much lower than I want them to.
Yep.
But I saw no rabbit injury at all on the roses. Some years it's devastating. But because we've had such an open winter, the rabbits have had more things to eat, I believe. And so if they've got enough alternatives, they've even had dry grass to munch on all winter, although my roses are probably tastier. But I'm happy not to see that. Some years when everything's all covered with snow, those poor rabbits need nutrition, and they start looking for our fruit trees and anything they can nibble on down. And so the roses, I think, are going to be okay, but some top damage. Not seeing rabbit injury on things the way that I did. So far, I think our shrubs are all looking okay. Oh, I should mention lilacs, though.
Yeah.
Lilacs are an interesting case because in the fall of the year, the buds get nice and big and juicy and ready to expand because in the spring of the year, when they burst forth, they have that flower bud already created inside. That's why they can bloom so early in spring, because that flower bud is all sitting down there. That flower is sitting down there preformed inside a big fat bud ready to go. So in the fall of the year and during the winter, lilac buds always look like they're fat and ready to explode, and they do. This year too. I did not see any of them that expanded already, which would have been bad. So I know some people are mentioning that they saw their lilacs and wow, it looks like they're budding out. I would have to make sure that they aren't just typically fat like they always are and nice and green. But now I did hear some reports from southern Minnesota, the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. Now, I know they've had more snow than we have, I believe, on some of these storms. But there are reports, verifiable reports of actually some trees and shrubs where the buds have expanded. And, of course, that's not a good situation.
Right. One of the things when you were talking about lilacs that reminded me, what about forsythia? Forsythia is another early bloomer, one of the first things.
Yeah. They bloom before the leaves even come out on that shrub.
I can't remember if you have a forsythia in your yard, or is that something that
it's on my bucket list.
Okay.
See, I got a big bucket list. I don't have a forsythia. You see, I got a garden for years and years because I got to get myself a forsythia. There's some wonderful, couple of nice ones out of NDSU and some winter hardy ones. And so I didn't have a forsythia to examine the flower buds or even the flower leaf buds on those.
And I know in our yard, as far as perennials, the Berginia.
Yes.
Berginias are usually because they're an evergreen kind of, aren't they?
Yeah, the leaves kind of stay evergreen. How do they look?
They get a little hardier. You really, a lot of times even in late March and certainly in April, they will start, they'll really take form. And we haven't really noticed that those have progressed. So that's probably a good thing there.
Sure. And now, and of course, then if we progress on to trees, when I took a look at trees, poplar buds are always fat and look like they're ready to sprout. I didn't see on the poplars, I didn't see any action yet. Now, you showed me a photo of a linden, and those buds were really, really thick and plump. But the trees in our yard that I've examined, nothing had expanded yet. But boy, they look like they are just ready to pop. Now, the University of Minnesota had a nice article recently written just a couple of days ago here in February, and they indicated that one of their contributors that does maple syrup tapping has started tapping their maple trees already because the sap was flowing in those trees. And it's February.
Right.
And the sap was already flowing within that tree, so they're tapping it for maple syrup. They said the customary time for that is in March or mid-March. So that indicates that their maple trees, the stuff is starting to flow already. Now, a couple of things that wake up a tree. When the frost comes out of the soil, the roots, of course, sense that warmth, and then that can start waking up the tree, and things start flowing inside. And so with our soil only about 32 degrees, it's not going to take much warmth, and that could start activating some trees. But the other thing that trees are very sensitive to, luckily, is day length. During their short days of fall and winter, it's a signal to the tree. Trees are really pretty smart. They sense the day length, and they know winter time, it's time to shut down. And the day length needs to get to a certain point of length in order for trees to wake up. But pretty soon they're going to be with these longer days. Have you noticed how nice and long these days are starting to get? So pretty soon even the day length is going to warm up. And when we had NDSU Extension Forestry Specialist Joe Zalesnik on, he indicated too that our winter hardy tree species have to have a certain number of cold days in order for that dormancy to be met. I'm curious, have they met that dormancy yet? But anyway, I thought it was quite telling that in Minnesota, some of the maple trees are starting to be tapped a month early. And of course, okay, so what could possibly go wrong? Okay,
right.
The thing that I'm going to be watching really careful, okay, if things stay warm and mild, maybe we're going to be just fine. But if things start waking up and we get a really extended cold snap, it could really send things into shock. Now, this happened a few years ago with birch. Luckily, it only happened to the birch. But we had what Forester Joe calls the midwinter fake out. We had a warm spell, not enough to wake up other trees, but the birch don't have quite as much of they don't need quite as much of a cold spell. They don't stay dormant as long as what I'm trying to say. So the birch a few years ago woke up in this midwinter nice temperature fake out, and they actually started some material flowing. They didn't leaf out, but they started some sap flowing. And then we got some really cold weather. What we saw then in May, when the birch started to leaf out, excuse me, when the birch started actively growing, the upper half or 2/3 was dead.
Yeah.
They had started to warm up in that fake out, and the sap started flowing. When it got cold again, it froze that material, probably ruptured cells, and then that area was all dead. So when they leafed out normal, the only part that was still alive was the lower part. And of course, then your tree is ruined. So to me, a big concern would be if all of our trees, or a lot of our trees, even the better adapted trees, start flowing material, and then it all gets frozen and cells start rupturing, and we could have a lot of damage. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. There's not a whole lot we can do about any of that.
Right. And so far it does seem to be, looking at, again, the 10-day forecast, it'll cool down, but there's not going to be a sudden shock, like a...
I'm not seeing 20 below.
No. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything below zero yet, hopefully. So let's hold on for that. But yeah, like what kind of how cold, or would it just be a matter of having a sudden freeze, or if it gradually keeps drifting slower, and maybe by the end of February,
you're describing it well.
If by the end of February, even if we're below zero, is that okay? Is it just kind of, if it's just a real gradual freeze, if we have to have a freeze?
Yeah, I think you've described it as what might be a hoped for scenario.
Okay.
I think if we go from 45 degrees and things start kind of waking up, and we don't know for sure how things are doing. We know some maples are waking up already. But you see, if we drastically drop, if the bottom drops out of the temperature, then I think that's probably the worst case type thing. But at least if things became more gradual, a gradual customizing to a lower temperature, like you described, I think that might be a hoped for scenario.
What about the lawn?
as I walked across the lawn, and again, I just had to chuckle. Because this is a walk I would have had probably in April sometime, when you could walk across the snow, is all gone, and gosh, I could have mowed our lawn if I wanted. If I didn't reduce it in height, early in the fall there, I could have done that the other day here. And so as I walk across, one thing that is just made me happy, I see no vole damage. Now, voles are those little tailless field mice, kind of dark brown in color, that love to hide under deep snow all winter long, and they're nibbling on our grass and making all these little winding channels at the surface, creating nests and nibbling away. And then when the snow disappears, you've got all these meandering little channels, and they've made a mess. You got to rake up all this loose grass, and the grass will usually come back, but it's unsightly, and it does set it back. So I see none of that, mostly because the voles haven't had anywhere to hide.
Right.
And I'm thinking maybe the predators are getting them, I hope, because they've been all over the area, those voles, and they can really do a lot of damage. Plus, if they go after your trees, young trees that are maybe a couple inches in diameter, or maybe larger than that, the voles can be working under the snow right about at ground line, and they can totally chew all the bark off of your tree, girdling it and killing it. So I am happy that those little voles have had no snow under which to hide. And so I'm happy. So on our lawn, what do you think? What do I think? I have a good feeling about the lawn, even on the south side of our house where it's warmer. I did not see the lawn waking up. But boy, I mentioned the top couple inches are unthawed.
And when you think about it,
we're getting like a spring-type rain today.
Grass root system is not real deep, is it?
No,
not for your standard lawn.
So it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't take much for those roots to kind of thaw out.
What would happen if they did start waking up, and then we got a freeze? Would that just kind of put it back to sleep, or is there potential for damage?
Our bluegrass and fescue is so cold tolerant that I don't think a freezing and thawing is probably going to have much effect on it. Some of the less hardy grass species, such as the ryegrass and perennial ryegrass, that are sometimes in a mix, that are less winter hardy, those could be affected. But our Kentucky bluegrass, which is 99% of all our grasses are that, and then the fescues, the creeping red fescues, which is a shade-type grass, those are so winter hardy that I don't think we're going to get die out. And I'm happy because we don't have the snow mold issue that we had last year when the snow disappeared. We had a lot of snow mold. And so, everything exposed to the air, I'm not seeing mold of any type. So, I enjoyed walking around the lawn. I thought, this should be good for it, unless something really bizarre happens. If it continued like this April type rain that we're getting in early February, if that extended for very long, grass likes it cool, and it wouldn't take too much for that to start growing again.
It seems crazy to ask this, but what about fruits and vegetables? What here we are in February. I'm
glad you asked.
But what would this mean for our growing?
Yeah, here's a possible danger. And I don't lay awake nights thinking about this because there's not much we can do about it. But it's nice to kind of keep these things in the back of your mind. Okay, with as mild as it's been, not much frost in the ground. If we continue mild, fruit trees potentially could start opening their flower buds early. Maybe not now, but if they open them, say, even in March instead of early May, the chance of those flower buds, which are quite frost sensitive, the chance of those flower buds getting totally frosted off and frozen would be very, very great. There's always a risk of those flower buds getting frosted and killed even in May, because we get May killing frosts. And if our apples and plums, when they open up, typically sometime during May, even when they open during the normal time, we can always get a late frost. And when the flower buds are frozen, those flower buds were set last summer. So they have one set of buds. So if those flower buds come out too early and get frozen off, that's it for that year.
Yeah.
There will be no apple crop for that year. So that's a concern that if these apples and fruit trees start opening buds too early and we get a typical frost, we could lose fruit crops. So that's a real concern with the fruits. For vegetables, when I look at our garden, gosh, no snow. It wouldn't take too much to get that to kind of wake up and start doing some vegetables. I mean, I'm not going to plant anything in February here, but without the snow cover, it could get workable early, depending on what we do from here on out. But if it gets more workable early, maybe in April I could plant some frost hardy things, maybe some spinach, a little lettuce, some radish, some things like that that'll tolerate freezing temperatures. So maybe I could garden a little earlier. So we'll stay tuned.
Well, even if we can't get out and garden now, we can start making plans. One of the things that people should make plans about is the upcoming Garden Palooza. Tell us about this. You've set the date now. Everything is ready going.
Yard and Garden Palooza. Save the date. It is in Fargo, Saturday, April 27th. It's an all-day gardening event, and it's held at Shanley High School on Saturday. So plenty of front door parking, auditorium for the breakout. Oh, and the keynoter is Mary Holm, who's been a good
friend of the
show. And so we're looking forward to that. And then we'll have breakout sessions. And by our next podcast, I should be able to tell you that the registration is open.
Okay.
So registration not quite open yet. I'm still finalizing some of the breakout session presenters, but save the date. Saturday, April 27th, Fargo, Shanley High School.
How about do you have any other online presentations coming up?
I do. On this coming Monday evening, February 12th, I'm doing a webinar on new annuals and perennials. So I'm doing 4 webinars. The following one in a couple of weeks, and I know you probably can't, jot these dates down, but I'll give you a spot where you can find them in a minute. And then on February 26th, which is a Monday evening, I'm going to talk all about tomatoes, the great tomato race. Following that, already into March, that will be shrubs, all the different types of shrubs that you could look at for planting in our area. And then the following one is going to be tips. The final one would be final tips on how to get our flowering containers to look really, really good. So for all of these events, Yard and Garden Palooza, my webinars, if you just search online for NDSU Cass County Extension. NDSU Cass County Extension, it'll take you to our events page, and then you'll see those things there. The registration links and etc. will be there. Because for each of the webinars, they're free, but you do need to register so I can send you the webinar link. And those are fun live webinars.
Yeah. Well, so if people have any questions about these, or if they have questions about things that they think are growing in their garden, maybe
I'd like
a little
to hear
too
about
early,
it.
send pictures, take pictures, send pictures. Or if people have any questions about anything else, or if you need to be talked down from wanting to get out and going into the garden and planting something right now, Don, how is the best way to contact you?
Email me, donald.kinsler, spelled Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. Man, I'd love to hear if something is really starting to pop where you know that the buds have expanded out and you can see the little leaves. I'd really like to hear about it because it's kind of fun to hear what's going on. And again, a lot of this is just beyond our control, but yet it's still worth listening. I don't know that I'll ever forget the winter of 2023, 2024.
No, this is one that's going to go down. Who knows if it'll go down for the better or for the worse?
Exactly.
We won't know until the growing season's over. But
Stay tuned. But yet, keeping all of these things in our mind, in the back of our mind, it will be very important to relate. Okay, what are we seeing in April, May? How is our things coming out of it? Is it growing? Was it injured? And depending on how things are, it will relate back to what's been happening.
All right,
it's a good discussion, John.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having more.
And thanks, everyone, for listening.